call to order the August 22nd, 2022 meeting of the Zoning Bylaw Committee. We'll start with a roll call attendance of who's here in alphabetical order.
Clark Brewer here.
Tom Callahan here. Dave.
David Farag here.
And Cassie.
Cassie Malatesta here.
Okay. Thank you for all being here. I'll try to make this quick. With us tonight is Cassandra, what is your official title? Assistant Town Planner?
Yes. Assistant Town Planner.
Fantastic. Okay.
And crushing it so far. Thank you.
Yes, no, thank you for hosting us tonight. And then also with us, you can see, at least in the upper right corner of my screen, is the Honorable Judith Cutler. She is a former judge of the Land Court, is a member of the KP law firm, and with our town council, Carolyn Murray, is going to be working with us on the bylaw as we go forward. So, Judge Cutler, we have Clark Brewer, who's a fellow member of the planning board with myself, Cassie Malatesta. She is a member still, I think, of the Master Plan Implementation Committee. And Dave Farag is a former member of a number of committees and is our newest member. For everyone's benefit, I notified Dave that Lauren last week or so ago found a conflict with Dave, that because he's on the board of registrars, which I guess is the two political parties in town appoint people to run and watch the elections and everything. And because I guess that's a state position, he can't hold both that elected position and another position. So I told him of that today because we got Carolyn's opinion that there's no way around that. So Dave's decision on whether he's going to leave us or the board of registrars.
Oh, I'll be leaving the board of registrars. This is
Okay.
much more exciting.
For those of you who don't know, David looks like he's in front of the New Suffolk Law School. So he is also a fellow attorney. And we have Jack Creighton is the chair of our select board as a member. And Jack informed me the other day that Paul Grady, recently former planning board and now a select board member, is going to become a second member from their board on our board. But Paul just texted me that his daughter's coming into town, so he can't make tonight's meeting. But I think everybody here knows who Paul is. And now Lauren has joined us. Welcome, Lauren. And Lauren, I don't know if you've met Judge Cutler, but
yeah, we had a nice chat.
Yes.
Oh, that's right. Yes, I heard about that. So just talking. That's good. Good. And so everybody's, we now have on board with town council. I wish it was a year ago that we had this, but they're on board with us. And we'll be up to 6 members. And we are still, if anybody in the public is out there, but I do not see that anybody in the public is out there. Perhaps we should publicize it, Cassandra and Lauren, somehow, some way, in the town's webpage, that we need another member of the committee, and preferably someone who's not connected to a board at this point.
We'll work with communications staff to get some information out.
Yeah, good. I mean, I know various people are talking to various people, but nobody's committed yet. So, all right. So to start our meeting, we had a joint meeting with the select board on August 9th. And anybody who else was there, correct me if I'm wrong. Dave appeared from Guernsey Island and the Channel Islands. That went above and beyond the call of duty, by the way, Dave. Thank you for doing that. But we have forged a plan ahead, and just a few weeks ago, the plan, originally at the request of the select board, was to try to do this bylaw in 2 steps, with some coming this fall, some coming in the spring. But right now we're going to be on a track to do possibly all of it in the spring, maybe spring 23 and fall 23, but certainly we are not looking at putting together anything substantial for the fall of 23, although I want to talk about a couple of things later that perhaps we might bring forward. Judge Cutler and KP Law are going to start doing a diagnostic. I presume that's underway, of our entire bylaw. They have seen the draft that has been put together. I think they've been working with our boards for almost a year now, so they're familiar with some of the issues we face. And we will be getting that diagnostic relatively soon.
Well,
Well, I said relatively. I qualified.
relatively, by the end of September.
Right, okay.
Yeah. But that's part of also why I was hoping I could hear some issues that you all have already spotted and are concerned about in terms of interpreting the bylaw and how it's being used. And if you could, while we're talking, if you think of something. You know,
Okay, yeah.
you know.
So we have a plan to go ahead, but even for a May 23 town meeting, we have to have most of the articles ready by late January, early February, in order to keep on the timeline for planning board's formal review, which will take more than one meeting if we're doing the whole bylaw. You know, my own thought about that too is that we'd still break it up into pieces so that some things pass and other things don't. We haven't had the whole thing sink or swim all at once. But we'll when we get to that, we'll get to that stage. But you know, so we still have a lot of work to do and a relatively short time to do it. And with our schedule, you know, I revised the timeline for this after that joint meeting. Lauren has edited that as well, but you know, I'm looking at that this committee would meet twice a month going through the fall and winter at least, and probably keep to these Monday meetings, perhaps to Wednesdays, and when the planning board does not meet. Select board meets Tuesdays. That's really the only other conflict, unless Cassie, I'm not sure if your committee is meeting still in the daytime or a particular night, but I want to avoid everybody's conflicts. So the other thing we also talked about, because in the timeline originally was to do public forums, something that the working group before us has talked about for some time, and that we talked about at our last meeting. And the idea came up that rather than do sort of wide-ranging general forums about the bylaw and potential changes, that we were going to do that on a much more focused basis by subject matter. If I could share my screen. Now I got to find the document, right? All right, hold on a second. I got to open the document first, correct? To share something.
Are you talking about your suggested forum, focused public forums dated 3rd of August?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so here, let me go back to Zoom. No, wait a minute, where'd you all go? Damn. Where'd you all go? There you are. Share screen. Focused forum. So these were just ideas of how to do some forums, and Judge Cutler, this will kind of tell you what are the various issues of the moment in relatively broad categories. Lauren and I have discussed this, that, you know, part of the issue is staffing needs, because these things would be done as hybrid meetings like the joint meeting was. You need staff to help you do that. So we're not sure we can do this many or do 1 or 2 a month going through the winter. So these could be consolidated from 6 into something, but for the benefit of Judge Cutler, the harbor and the village are both issues of concern, and which we've seen a lot of development proposals of late. Housing and affordable housing in general has been a long issue we've discussed in town, both for downsizing options and for starter home options. We now have the state's MBTA plan that's coming at us. We've long talked about our accessory and why it isn't widely used. We do have accessory units throughout town.
You're breaking up a bit.
Sorry, we have accessory units
better.
throughout the town, but whether they're actually permitted under the bylaw is a completely different issue. On that score, I ran into Woody Chittick yesterday, and he said he's done some work on this bylaw. So I've asked him to share that with us, and I'll I'll get that to you as soon as I have it from him. The table of area regulations, I mean, this is a big issue we've been talking about in the working group for the last 2 years. You know, whether we change our frontage requirements, our height requirements. This is really where the last substantive change of the bylaw happened in 1986, was in this table. On the left side of the table, setbacks, and height. On the right side of the table is house size max.
I think you're breaking up a bit again.
Sorry, I don't know what to do about that. But,
Try moving closer to the mic, or make sure nothing's hitting the mic, or
right on top of my computer. Okay. I'll
you sound the same.
well,
It's probably the
I-
connection. Yeah.
I don't know what to tell you, but for Judge Cutler's benefit, the idea of house size, how we deal with large home reviews that we have now, how we deal with house size in general is a big issue of discussion amongst the working group. We've done a lot of research on that. So we have some data to back up some ideas that we had. And in the middle of that middle bullet there about going to floor area ratio or gross floor area.
Tom, is it worth trying to turn your video off maybe?
God, I don't know.
He could talk through his phone and then just use the video.
You
Off
might
the
want to call in,
computer, that
Tom. I'm
might
getting
work.
like every other word.
What's the number? Damn it.
We can hear you now.
Now we can hear you. You might have been too close to the microphone.
All right.
We'll
Yeah.
try it from then.
Better.
No
All right.
hands in front of the mouth.
All right. No, I just get frustrated with technology.
It- You're still breaking.
Am I still breaking up?
It was in and
were.
out.
Hold on. It's going to take me a minute to get into the thing on my phone. So anyway, look, if you can hear this, just look at the 6 topic areas, and those are really the big issues that we have been discussing and dealing with over the last years on the working group, and that the boards are facing. Again, whether it has to be 6, I don't think so, but those are the topics, and in consideration for what I might suggest we might consider, and I emphasize might, for the fall town meeting, I think we would I would think we would deal with the harbor and village issues first, since they are both facing immediate projects, immediate changes, and getting a lot of comment in the community right now. So
You mean for this fall?
yeah, and in that regard, let me just skip ahead to that. There's 2 issues that I think concern us, or concern me certainly, and I think concern the group, the working group as a whole. But the first was our definition of height, and it's come up repeatedly, and it comes up again. And the anomaly of Cohasset is that we measure peaked roofs to the middle of the peak, not to the top.
That's pretty standard, Tom.
I don't think so, but
Well,
anyway, it's something that we have talked.
We could look into that, but it is pretty standard in my experience with zoning bylaws throughout the Commonwealth.
Also, it also, to a lot of people, has absolutely zero common sense, but we had come up with a new definition, and I thought we were, and there are 2 things about how many measuring points there are at the bottom where you start the measurement of height, being that we don't have a flat piece of land in town pretty much. And then the second is, what is the measurement at the top, particularly with a peaked roof? It keeps coming up. You know, we have large home reviews where I think the applications are always hitting the limits. And I think it's something we should change sooner rather than later.
Just a quick comment. You're absolutely right. I think there's a consistent problem with the definition of the average pre-construction grade for Cohasset. And for decades, what's been used is the high point and the low point as the average instead of the actual definition, I think says mean or median. But we've had a number of examples that have like 580 Jerusalem Road, where they used 2 points and it was not appropriate, and it didn't give an accurate average, but it did give an average that was advantageous to the developer. So I think locking in that, taking into account whether it's post-construction, pre-construction, or something in between, but identifying a number of points within the 10 feet, understanding that Cohasset does have a complex geometry. In terms of the height, I mean, what are people saying that the problem with the height of houses or buildings is? What have you heard, Tom?
I'm sorry, I'm just.
Recording.
All right. Let me-
I think Lauren has her hand up as well. Yep.
Yeah, I know. Lauren, go ahead. Let me just. Let me fix this. All right, go ahead, Lauren.
Okay, hold on. You have to turn one of your sounds off, Tom.
I am too. Does that help?
I think so. Okay, anyway, just a point of clarification, more of a question, so I understand the process that you just laid out. I know you mentioned when you and I spoke about the different topics for forums, did you intend to say that you want to do the Harbor Village forums first in the fall, or are you suggesting articles for zoning amendments for fall town meeting?
I'm suggesting two things, that we do at least 3 forums, if not 4, between now and December.
Yes, understood.
Separate
So,
separate
sorry,
from that
continue.
discussion, separate from that discussion. And I would, the only reason I would say Harbor and Village first is because A, they have ongoing big developments that we're getting a lot of public comment about, and a lot of criticism, warranted or unwarranted, about the state of the bylaw. And number 2, if we were to consider any zoning articles for the fall, I would suggest it be the definition of height overall, height specifically in the harbor. And then the third thing that impacts the village is the idea has been brought forward about having what I would call zoning around the around the edges of the village and harbor districts where they abut residential districts. We have some zoning to that effect between the highway business districts and the residential districts. We do not have anything like that in the village and the harbor. And the thought would be that at least at the boundaries, you would have perhaps a larger setback and perhaps a lower height, so that there isn't some large looming structure within 15 feet or whatever the setback is to residential properties. That is not my original thought. It was brought to my attention by other individuals, and I only throw those out there for consideration. If we don't bring them forward in the fall, that's fine. We could bring them forward in the spring as part of the larger changes. The height definition in particular, to me as a planning board member, is of particular concern, because we seem to be, every project coming before us seems to be at or near the limits allowed. And in some cases with the peak roof, we are seeing 40-foot high structures. And to answer Clark's question, the things that I hear is just a general complaint about the size of houses being built in the town generally. So that includes height, that includes bulk, square footage, cubic footage. And, that is something that the working group focused some of its research on to see how our houses in Cohasset, the average size is getting bigger. And the answer is yes, they are. Noticeably so since the year 2000. So, I throw those out there to deal with in the short term. We can also always deal with it as part of the larger changes that are coming.
Okay, Tom, just one point just to make. I think that was a helpful explanation, so thank you for clarifying. Just from my understanding of the past discussion that we had at the joint meeting, it was not clear that bringing forward articles related to content like the height maximums and things like that and changing those sort of sometimes can be contentious points. It was not evident to me that that was something that this group was going to suggest and pursue bringing for the December town meeting. So I think that's just an important distinction to make when you report back to the select board or, whichever direction you intend to go, because that is a new piece tonight.
Well, I sat there at the joint meeting and I agreed with everything, but I think you all know I don't agree with everything privately. And, I still have to work as a planning board member on some of these issues and they keep coming up. And the longer we put off making change, the more we're going to continue to get projects that we might not particularly care for or designs that we don't particularly care for. I mean,
in terms of the height issue, it might make sense to do some modeling of examples of what you're talking about based on what's allowed now and what we might change would what would they look like. The thing that I've noticed about the height is that the way that it's set up is it is one of the standards that a lot of towns have, and it allows the creation of an attic space. If you had a 35-foot height to the peak, in some examples it might exclude the creation of an attic. But there are some other things that are related to height and building volume and square footage and RGFA that we might look into. Probably not for the fall town meeting, but like for example, the basement, whether it's walkout or not, isn't a part of RGFA. But just leaving the height issue aside, and from your list, Tom, there's a number of these that were covered during the master plan public forums. And I would suggest that maybe we dust off some of those as a part of a public forum, dust off what was presented and then what the conclusions were post meeting to the committee. So we have something that's reasonably well put together as a baseline. And then we can add to it in terms of the most current Harbor Village and housing issues.
That's fine. That data is now, 5 years old at least, if not older, but that's fine.
The master plan was adopted 3 years ago.
But the forums were well before that. So I have no problem with bringing up that data because I'm sure we gained relative data from the 2004 master plan. That was done 20 years ago.
Well, I don't think the master plan work is at the point of being irrelevant yet, especially with the period of COVID in between. I think that sort of a lot of things went on hold during that period of time.
Mr. Chairman, could we maybe get back to the agenda? Because I think we're going down the rabbit hole into the intricacies of the zoning bylaw and potential new things. But I think with the judge here would be to maybe keep it on a 30,000 foot level as to what we're looking to do and what the town's looking to do, and then we can get into the meat of the matter maybe after that.
Well, I am trying to keep to the agenda. That part of the agenda tonight is to decide on going forward with these forums, because these if we are going to even keep on the new timeline of a spring 23 meeting, we need to begin these. And we need to not do this work just at these meetings. We need not to just rely on the data from the master forums. We need to be upfront with the folks in town and get this, get their feedback. All right, with all due respect, we just need to move forward on them.
And just so Dave, so you know, at the meeting with the selectmen, there were a few members of the Board of Selectmen that said clearly that they wanted to get public input, not just hear from this committee crafting bylaws, that they wanted to, if we have bylaws and ideas, that we get as much public input as possible on what people think, want, hate, love, about what's possible now, and what could be possible or crafted in the future.
Oh, no, I don't have an issue with the forums. I think they're all put together well as far as, subject matter. But I just want to get back to, while we have the judge here, is maybe the overview of some of the issues regarding the bylaw, maybe not the intricacies of it.
All right, let me get us back. All right, so the forums, just their subject matters are alerting the judge and Carolyn what the key issues of the moment are, as we've looked at the bylaw for the last 2 years and what the boards are confronting in dealing with the bylaw.
Can I just ask a question, Tom?
Yeah, sure.
On that. And I also heard from the planning director and from the building inspector that height and measurement of height is an issue, but also frontage and lot area, lot definitions. And is that also something that you were?
Well, all right, so here's my thought on that. In the draft, there are all kinds of new definitions. There are old ones thrown out, new ones brought in, reorganized in a different way. I do not think that in the draft I changed the definition of lot area, and frontage is up for discussion. The most significant changes we may make to the bylaw will be in the table of area regulations. That's where we are going to address frontage and lot area and lot width on the one side of the table. On the other side of the table is what are we going to do about house size, if anything. Those are going to be the most controversial. That's why that article was proposed for the spring in the two-step process. It's going to take a while to get through that one. I'd like to do, that needs to be a standalone forum. We need to be upfront about the issues, but the working group to this point, and now this committee, had yet to develop a consensus on what to do. We had not developed any consensus of whether we should leave 50-foot frontage, which is unique for a suburb, and go back to what we had in 1969. We made a change in 1969 for a reason. But we're involved in a project right now that's probably going to give us some very real world examples of the difference between typical suburban zoning and our old zoning and what we have today. And that's important because the working group never got to the point of developing any data about what is better to have, 50-foot frontage or 150-foot frontage. We hadn't gotten to that point. We talked about it a lot. We talked about identifying large undeveloped tracts of land in the town and doing some comparisons, but we didn't have the engineering support. We didn't, or budget at that point in time. We never got to it. So I think we should discuss it, but the definition, the height in the table is the 35-foot measurement. The only context we've talked about changing the 35 feet is in the harbor to account for base flood elevation. We studied the fact that towns' height range from 30 feet to 35 feet. We're on the high end, but nobody on the working group has ever suggested we deviate from 35 feet. It's the definition. And we thought about bringing the definition.
I thought that Jen and John Hallen had worked on a diagram. Did that ever get finalized?
No, it didn't get finalized. It's finalized as much as a matter of policy, but at our last meeting, the applicant and their attorney basically said, well, we don't care about your policy. We don't have to follow your policy. We have to follow your definition in the bylaw.
Sorry, I don't mean for a specific case. I just mean for did we
Yes,
have that ready to submit?
the new definition would have been accompanied by a diagram.
The diagram is ready, yes.
Diagram is ready, the definition is ready. And the definition was built by a consensus of staff and the working group at the time.
Yeah, we worked on that, over a year ago, and I just haven't seen it.
Right, and it's a definition, and again, just because we're dealing with the issue and it's unclear and we're getting still lots of projects pushing the limit, I think we should discuss bringing it forward in the fall. But if you don't want to, then we won't do it. But again, as far as getting back to the track of the agenda, the forums, let's start them. Let's schedule something in September, October. I think, again, Harbor Village are fresh in people's minds because of the development that's going on. It would be a good topic to start, to get feedback. I'll leave it to the rest of you what would come next. I think the dimensional ones are something we're going to have to confront, but I think we should put that off until later on, until we as a committee have developed a consensus of what direction we might want to go and what choices we'd want to present to the community. Because again, I don't think we've done that. We certainly didn't on frontage, and we certainly haven't on house size. The working group has got the data to make some decisions on that, but we did not come to a point of suggesting or recommending an FAR ratio to implement. That's something that we have to think about. That's something where we have to think them through and as Clark said, plot out some scenarios. Some of these other things can come later on as well, but I'd like to at least leave tonight with the idea that early September we schedule a forum on the housing, harbor and village issues.
Tom, what do you have in mind for materials for these forums? How would they get prepared, and or would we just be using stuff that we have kicking around?
Well,
I mean, we don't want to just have words and without diagrams and examples, right?
I know I mean, the forums, as I originally conceived of them, I developed a slideshow, and it was basically, yes, showing potential words up there saying, well, here are the issues. And I don't think there's any magic to this, but let me just, for the harbor.
There could be magic, but I still think that we need visuals and examples and diagrams and things that help illustrate things beyond words.
Yeah. In the harbor, for example, one of the things that we had talked about in the past was consolidating the various checkerboard zoning that's down there into one zoning district. Basically what is now our waterfront business district. The zoning map would certainly help illustrate that and illustrate what would be changed, where it would be changed. But and I'm open to ideas of what visual aids you think will help, but it's really trying to get feedback on concepts. Should we do this? Should we do that? Is there anything else you think we should be doing? Because as you noticed on the public forums, everybody's got a complaint about the bylaw and what projects are resulting from it, but nobody has suggestions, of course, but we need to really need to get that out from people. So I'm open to the ideas. I just want to get it scheduled and advertised so that we have some meaningful attendance and feedback from it.
I know Lauren has her hand up, but don't we identify what the problems that we see are and show examples of those problems, and then some potential solutions in terms of zoning, and then take it from there? I
would be prepared to offer those what has been discussed in committee meetings over the past 2 years of what potential solutions are, but it's more, okay, here's a problem, here's a thought about solving that problem.
Right.
What other ideas do you have? And again, with the harbor, it'll be easy. Throw up the zoning map and they'll be able to visualize what's zoned what and all along the harbor and how we might change that. Anyway, David or Lauren, whichever one of you was first. I didn't see. What ladies first? Lauren, go ahead.
Thank you. I'll be quick. You had mentioned earlier after Harbor and Village, what other items might be priority topics. I just want to let you all know that since the final version of the MBTA communities regulations have been put out, the deadline for us to submit an action plan for compliance will be January 31st of the upcoming January 2023. So I would also suggest that we need to put the sort of MBTA community discussion, multifamily housing in the top of the priority list.
And then that becomes forum 2, and that's something we should obviously coordinate with the Affordable Housing Committee because they're doing a lot of work on this subject.
Right.
So
And then my second point, just before we get too far into the details again, is that just wanted to get a pulse from the rest of the committee if the sort of schedule, if we have a consensus on the schedule and frequency, so that, I mean, because we can do a lot more planning around what the forum structure looks like, where we're scheduling and things like that. But before we get into details, I just want to know if it makes sense for all of you. Tom had put together the schedule first, and when I took an edit, I tried to put in some actual dates that were available and feasible. Also, for staff to be there, it's going, I mean, one forum a month is really the maximum we can commit to right now. But Tom wants to move ahead with 2. So I'm not sure what we need to do, but that can be a conversation that we figure out. I just want to get a feeling from the rest of the committee, because so far I've really only heard from Tom.
shame on me.
Well, I mean, I think the broad complex subject matter might need to be spaced out a month. I mean, it's hard to imagine having a forum, digesting what came out of the forum, and then being put it in a format to kick around as a committee happening, you know, it within 2 weeks of the forum, so that the next forum can be informed by that.
My only
But once a
concern,
month seems like the quickest, but hey,
yeah, but my only
what does everyone think?
My only concern is the timeline of getting to spring 23. I mean, if we don't keep to the spring 23 schedule, or we split it up into spring and fall, we can spread things out. We just don't have the luxury of time to spread things out too much if we're going to. I don't want to get up at any town meeting and be accused that we didn't get any public input of this. And so we have to start gathering.
That's a priority for the selectmen.
Yeah, it's a priority for us too as a committee. And yes, things with the working group got delayed and put off, and it's a shame, but we're working with this schedule of a target date, and we may not hit that target date, but let's at least try. And I understand the staffing issues, and I like to believe there's a solution to that. But, you know, for now, I think if I'm hearing correctly, we have a consensus on what the first 2 forums would be, and whether it's September, October, or September. We can resolve that, working out the schedule with staff. Dave, you're muted, I think.
Thank you. If I just want to go over briefly from when we had the joint meeting with the select people. I wrote down a number of notes, but I think there was some comments which were very illustrative and listed out as to what particular things to look at within the zoning bylaw. And this was kind of the jumping off point. I think this would be helpful for Judge Cutler. And I'm going to name them off quickly. It'll only take me a minute. But these were the issues that were identified. And if there's any others, and I did take notes of all the selectmen as well, but it was frontage, the height, including measurement, which has been talked about already, the setbacks regarding 3A in the village, the home size and massing of homes regarding the bylaw, the single lot exemption, which is a portion of our bylaw, which is very unique to Cohasset. Mitigation, potentially looking at a formula for some type of mitigation for residential and or commercial. That's really important, I think, in a number of different projects that could be not only now, but in the future, thinking of the future. Accessory dwellings, having some flexibility, looking at a historical district, village parking, fringe district, in other words, as it goes from one district into another. Looking also at the design guidelines that we have regarding the bylaws and with the boards. The harbor in general was talked about, the reconciliation of the bylaw to reconcile it with not only under state guidelines and law, but that's sort of what's going to happen with the review that's being done by KP Law to look to see what warts pop out from looking over the bylaw. And then from that to have a communications plan and how to not only from the intake of the forums, but then once that's all distilled, to have a communications plan going into the town meeting, if it is the spring town meeting, to be able to talk about what have a comment process and then distill it and then get the support of the selectmen and the town as we go into town meeting going into next year. So those were the things that I took out of the meeting with the selectmen, that they had gone point by point on. And then all of those have branches of, of the tree that go off into different areas. But I think those are the main things of the bylaw to be looked at. So I just want to bring that up in sort of one fell swoop to get those on the table.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Dave.
Yeah.
Thanks, Dave. That's
I
helpful.
mean, which coincidentally or not coincides with a lot of the changes that have been suggested for the bylaw already. All right, well, I want to, Judge Cutler, is there anything you'd like to add at this point about the forums or how we should?
Well, yeah, I'm just, as I'm listening to this, how really aggressive it is in terms of your timing and the wide range of topics that you had. And I'm thinking that you are, at least the way you've been talking, honing in on your priorities. And as I'm thinking on my other side of my brain on what's going on with the diagnostic on the zoning bylaw and just my analysis as I've been going through it and listening to people talk about issues, it seems to me that to throw all of this at town meeting in one fell swoop is a disaster waiting to happen. It seems as though you've got narrower topics that are perhaps something applicable across the board in several districts, or that dealing with the dimensional requirements, for example, parking requirements, things of that sort. But then you've got much, much broader range planning goals. And there, I'm worried that if you bring too much, it's going to wind up where people are just going to stop voting after a while. This is after, really 50 years of going to town meetings in all kinds of towns and cities, and every town meeting in every municipality is different, and so is every town meeting in every town different.
Judge Cutler, can I ask you a question on that topic?
Yeah.
Would you see that what we're doing is a zoning overhaul in terms of like your experience? Like, is that what essentially we're doing right now?
Yeah, this is not a recodification. What we're
because I think I was just going to ask a follow-up question, like if it is, what is the standard process for that? Because I think what you're saying is exactly what a lot of people are feeling and thinking. And I think it would just be helpful from your experience, since you have so much of what that process how it should go.
Well, as I'm thinking about it, and this is something I definitely want to have input, with you all and with staff. It seems to me that there's some very basic changes that can be made to the current bylaw, just structurally formatting, clarifications, making sure it's consistent internally and with state law. That's like one package. It's pretty straightforward to present. If you don't make too many substantive changes, you can do it in several articles and usually get the low-hanging fruit first and then get a little more complex. Once you have your structure the way you want it, and really you don't even have to go through the whole bylaw so much as to get into the first really 8 sections, 6 or 8 sections that form the core of the bylaw that are pretty much applicable unless overridden by the overlay districts. So if you get that core in shape, and you then, as you're doing that, you're doing these forums on the broader planning questions, you'll know what major substantive changes you're going to want to bring.
Mhm.
And that's, to me, those are different. And to overwhelm people.
Oh. I can't hear. Why can't I hear?
Hey, Judge Cutler, I think we lost you.
Lost me.
Oh,
Did I just click
now I can
something?
hear you.
Oh, okay. So you don't want too much, because sometimes you wind
I
up.
can hear you.
You still
Can-
can.
Oh, I
Can
can
I-
hear you.
I mean, I appreciate hearing that, because that was the original plan, to do this in 2 steps. And the
Mhm.
first step was going to be organizational, pretty much exclusively. That was what the select board originally said to me they wanted to see done. Then they do the complete 180. So maybe we're back to a 2-step process where what we proposed for the fall of this year will be in the spring, and then what we proposed for the spring will be in the fall. That'll be the real substantive changes, and it'll give us more time to study those substantive changes and have more forums and more input.
And
Why
Tom,
not?
do you think
I
that's,
mean,
that-
I'm sitting here confused hearing that comment, because it's just exactly the exact opposite of what was discussed at the joint meeting and agreed upon. Again, I didn't agree with it, but now we're back to doing a 2-step process, and I agree, it should be a 2-step process.
Well, I think, Tom, the reason why it got condensed into a 1-step process at first is because you wanted to hold on to the same deadline. Whereas if you're okay with pushing it out another town meeting cycle, then we can do the 2-step process, and that's not problematic. It had become so condensed when you still wanted to meet the original goal date of annual town meeting 23 or 24, I guess.
Original
Yeah,
goal,
I genuinely think it makes more sense to do the 2-step process along anyway, and I have agreed with that.
I also thought that Pat
oh,
came out of,
hallelujah, vindication then, but the original goal when the working group started was, the target date was spring 23, but we would have, in that scenario, probably brought forward some articles last spring. We did not. We probably would have done something this fall. We are not. So if it's a 2-step process, it's now fall and spring and fall 23 at the earliest.
I also feel like once we canceled having Stantec or a third party help us with this, the 2-step process kind of faded or melted into one. And I wonder if that feedback got a little misconstrued to the select board on like a path moving forward without a third party or a Stantec. So it's really helpful to hear that from Judge Cutler, because she does have the experience, and I just feel like I've heard murmurs and feedback that it seems a little overwhelming, our timeline. And I feel like we've said this so many times, but in order to take 1 step forward, sometimes it's worth taking a step back. So I feel like this conversation is really timely before we get ahead of ourselves.
All right, I have no problem with that, as long as I hear it. That, I in the last 3 months, I've gotten conflicting direction from.
Because Tom, to your point, I feel like your email following up from the select board meeting was that they were okay with the timeline and to move forward accordingly. So
I sat there, we all sat there, and they all wanted to do this all by spring 23 in a 1-step process instead of 2. Now, if they're going 2, that's fine, but now it'll be spring and fall of 23, and that's fine too. But understand, as we discuss this, the horse keeps getting out of the barn. People are watching. People are going to do zoning freezes. Maybe it doesn't matter. Cohasset, it's way past the horse being on the barn anyway, but that's fine. But let's just settle on it, because then we can do forums at a once-a-month pace. We can do them on substantive topics, knowing knowing that we are not going to shoot for substantive changes until December 23's town meeting. That gives us until September of 23 to get those articles ready for prime time. Is that better for
And
all of us?
I don't think momentum, I think maintaining momentum and keeping the foot on the gas is extremely important. I don't think slowing down is it. I think it's more structuring ourselves in order to be effective and successful. I don't know. I feel like we heard it from multiple parties. We just heard it from Judge Cutler. I just think
All
it's
right,
just,
then that's fine. Then if everybody's okay with that, we will reach a consensus here that we're going to move on. Yeah, David, go ahead.
Thank you. I think that you have a couple things, is that with the forums that go on, you're going to get from people, hopefully, some of the issues and maybe some ideas that we don't have or have heard in the past. And so as a part of that process, I think you shoot for spring town meeting at a minimum to do the basic changes, but then we don't know what the extent of any substantive changes are. There might be limited substantive changes, which would be appropriate to go. There might be extensive ones which need to go. And that also depends on the reconciliation of the bylaw that KP Law is going to do, that's going to come out in later September to see what needs to be brushed up on the bylaw as well. So I think you go through the process just looking at the Springtown meeting of 2023 that you're going to have a number of changes, and then see what those are at that point. I think one thing that the judge should know is that with special town meeting, in Cohasset, generally speaking, the town has not done substantive changes on the bylaws in the special town meeting, even though our bylaw was created at a special town meeting way back in the 50s. So that is a point of context and a problem, that when substantive changes are brought on, people stand up and say it's been our tradition not to do it, this should be bumped to the spring, and then everything gets rolled over. So you automatically have a mark against you when one is brought up, even when it's noticed and whatever, and said, hey, we're putting these on. Someone always does that. So I think that's something that's different than maybe with other towns where they could just put them through in a special. But I do think, yeah.
I need to address that once and for all. I, honest to God, do not want to hear that argument one more time in this town. Because we did, in fact, do the 1955 bylaw all at once.
That's what I said, yeah.
We have done changes to zoning at special town meeting. It all depends on what's brought up and who's bringing it up. The town the developing world does not operate on our town meeting calendar. We are already behind the 8 ball that we have to do this every 6 months before we can react and make changes. Let's get off of that once and for all. We are operating.
May I make a suggestion? As chair, you should request of the moderator that point be made clear by the moderator, and so we won't even waste time at town meeting on that. And I think that's appropriate for the chair of the zoning bylaw, and we'll back you up at the select board.
Yeah, I'm more worried about the moderator letting out of town developers speak like at the last one.
Well,
So
I know.
that's a different issue, but I'd
I
really like,
called him about that as well.
I just don't want to waste time on that old fashioned notion, because that is not helping the town if we do changes every year. Meanwhile, we will have tipped our hand and the development community will go wild in the interim.
I understand that, Tom, but the reason that it was an unwritten rule and that was done from before was that so that people, because town meeting would only have barely a special town meeting would have barely a quorum at about 100 people. A town meeting in the spring would have close to maybe 300 people, maybe more. And the thought was that you didn't want things slipped in the special when people are around Christmas time or whatever, and it would be zoning slipped in there. So that was why. So I agree with you. The underlying bylaw of the town was down to the special. It doesn't bother me which one it's brought up with, but it is a factor, and it was brought up at the last one. So when zoning changes were brought up, that was one of the things that was brought up. I looked at I looked at the tape to review the special town meeting. Yeah.
I know what was brought up at the special town meeting. I was there. I don't know if you have, well, maybe you can say it's because of COVID, but our annual town meeting attendance isn't anything to write home about either. And whether it's 100 people or 300, in a perfect world, that few amount of people shouldn't be making these major decisions, but that's the system we live in. So let's just go forward. Let's,
And to move this along, I think
yes,
everybody
we're ready to move it along.
agrees. And the solution is to bring it to the moderator, and we'll have the select board also bring it to the moderator. Just, Tom, if you would, please remind me what I promised to do, okay?
Yeah, I know. Well, before you got it, all right, so we're back to a two-step process, by the way,
Right.
Jack, contrary to what the consensus seemed to be 2 weeks ago. So if I could summarize where I believe we all are, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong. As far as the overall process, we are still going forward, the KP diagnostic. We are now going to go forward with a two-step process of presenting the bylaw changes. First, the organizational and structural changes. Second,
And low hanging fruit.
And low hanging fruit.
and
right.
some, yeah, and what I originally had drafted was 12 articles, I think 9 of which were reorganizational and 3 were low hanging fruit that we needed to deal with. That would come forward in the spring.
While we're going through forums up until the spring.
And in the fall of 23 is where the first real substantive changes, like the table of area regulations, would be coming. All right, the forums, we will start those next month. I will work with staff to pick the date and which day of the week and the date to do it. We will start with the Harbor and Village as a focused forum. The second one in October would be on housing that we'll do jointly with the Affordable Housing Committee. And hopefully we will, at that point, Lauren, I assume, have all the finer points of what the state is attempting to shove down our throats. In the meantime, when we meet, I do think that even, again, the timeline for Springtown meeting is we have to have articles ready by end of January, early February. So let's use our meetings 2 a month. We can have, each agenda will have, if we've had a forum, we can discuss the results of those forums. But let's focus on the reorganizational articles. The diagnostic will have some input in that. Judge Cutler and Carol Murray are aware of the structure of the chapters, the idea of pulling some things out and into regulations. They're aware of all that. Let's discuss those as we go forward through our meetings and get that ready to go for the Springtown meeting. All right.
If I can help, the diagnostic report that should be ready for you by the end of September will lay out particular items for you to discuss and consider and decide whether or not which direction you want to go in, whether you want to ignore it for now and hold off later, whether you want to fix something now or not. And based upon the committee's feedback, based upon the feedback from the staff and the various boards, we then can incorporate any of those. And there's some of them are substantive, but as I said, I don't think they're controversial substantive. We would call out any that would be of great, some kind of concern, but most things can be incorporated into the basic reorganization and recodification to be presented, knowing, and I think what's helpful is if this committee is on a separate track, doing these forums and sort of figuring out the bigger questions, we keep that in mind as we're organizing the bylaw so that we can be prepared ahead of time to know what has to be changed to accomplish your objectives.
Right.
So that we have the basic framework for you to use. And it may mean that as part of the recodification, we don't touch the village districts. We leave it alone because we know a large scale proposed set of amendments will be coming forward in a few months. So there's no sense redoing it. So those are all issues and questions that will be presented for the board's consideration and feedback to us at the end of September. And I'm hoping that we can then get started with you on, helping you to draft the articles and so forth.
And I'll just remind everybody too that on the committee's webpage that we now have, the changes to the articles that in connection with the reorganization are on that page, or at least my proposals. So they're there for the moment. They can be taken up, taken down, changed, whatever, but they're there for discussion. Essentially, the first step would have changed the chapter structure. We would have been down to 9 articles instead of 22, and we would have changed articles 1 through 4, and then 5 through 9 would be the substantive stuff that comes later. So they're still there. We'll leave them there for the moment until we make some changes. But everybody should look at those just for the ideas. All right, so that's.
Can I ask another question of Judge Cutler? Have you ever been a part of the means and methods, part of the community outreach in the forums, or do you not usually get involved to that depth?
I was when I was an attorney. I often sat with committees, and so most times they would be more informal things, and it would be focused on one subject matter. It might even be a Saturday morning where people could come and have a workshop. Now, in most of those cases, there was a proposal on the table to discuss. It wasn't totally open. So I've never been in a situation where sort of the problem has been sort of opened to the public to get general feedback on what needs to be done.
My guess is that there's the people who would attend these forums know what's been going on. So I think that if we kind of kept to an agenda, I don't think it would be everyone's brand new and has no idea what's going on. I think that people who would attend these meetings have been to the special town meetings, have been in opposition of these agenda items. So that's helpful. I think kind of means and methods too, just understanding like, is a in-person forum as effective as like online surveys and phone calls, things like that. Like that's something where I think, it takes a certain type of person to be willing to spend a Saturday morning to come and sit in person. And I think that'd be helpful to understand like community outreach and what's the most effective way to proceed.
Yeah, I mean, the problems that I've seen with, and this was during COVID when there was no opportunity, obviously, to have in-person meetings. But what I saw in the one event that I did attend was that people with issues attended. And so the chat line was just full of their issues, and they weren't there to hear anything or discuss anything other than what they had on their list. And because I'm sorry.
They had an agenda, so to speak.
They had an agenda, and this was their way to gripe about whatever their particular issues were. And they tended to get a little nasty because they were using the chat line and didn't necessarily give a name. It kind of devolved. Now, that's not necessarily going to happen. And I think if you've got some graphics, you've got a good presentation, and you can get the word out and invite, people who are interested. And you know what? Having board members there is always best, because you got your family, so to speak, who sort of form the core of things and can help move it along.
Well, I agree. It makes sense to have something specific for people to react to, rather than vague generalities of, hey, this is the harbor, and what do you think? This is the zoning map. What do you think? We want to present the problems, and also have a bevy of solutions, potential solutions, how other towns have handled the problem, so that people can really react to the specifics instead of, I like the harbor as it is, instead of how could it be greater?
Well, I don't want to everybody get the impression it was going to be completely formless.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just reinforcing what Judge Cutler said.
Yeah, it's going to have, all of these forums will have ideas that the committee has discussed over the last 2 years. It's just that the committee has not made, the former one had not made any decisions we reached consensus on a lot of the stuff in the harbor, I'll say that, but we hadn't reached a lot of firm decisions. And so, again, I put materials out there, but I'm putting materials out there based on my interpretations of the consensus we've reached and the discussions we've had. But for Christ's sakes, nobody has voted on actually putting those forward. So at our next meeting, we will schedule our next meeting to happen before the first forum. And I will have out there the agenda for it and the specific things to discuss. But it also will be open-ended in the sense that it is an opportunity to get the community's feedback. And we will get special interest. We may get special interest on both sides. We have a lot of vocal people upset about the course of development. We have, that happened in the December town meeting, we have an agenda by those who are in favor of development. So, you know, we're not going to get large attendance at this thing, but we're going to get people who have something specific to say, and there's no way around that. You know, I think.
Why wouldn't we get a large attendance though if we do it right?
If we do it, yeah, I mean, the question is when.
Could we work with the communications consultant? Do we have a communication consultant, right? Could we? Lauren?
Yeah, I mean, I'm confident in, at least from the staff perspective, that we can begin these initial forums. We have enough capacity and to get the word out.
We can get the word out. That's not the problem. It's when do we do it? As the judge pointed out, and as we all know, we've even switched our town meetings off of Saturdays because nobody wants to do a meeting on Saturday morning. I think it's an ideal time, but it's not an ideal, it's an ideal time for us who work 5 days a week. So it's going to have to be a weeknight. It'll probably be a Monday like this. Or, we can't do Tuesday because the select board meets. We can't do Wednesday, the planning board meets. Can't do Thursday, the zoning board meets. So, it's all going to be a function of people who will make the time to participate. If they don't, they don't. But that's the best we can do. As far as written surveys and online surveys, that demands staff time to compile all that data, and I think they're useless personally. But if the staff wants to take that on and put out some doodle polls or questions and surveys and take on compiling that data, fine, we can do that as well. But I just don't think it's going to be effective.
Well, we will be doing that. So,
well, and I also think that feedback through that is at least from people who live in the town instead of people on Facebook 143 who don't necessarily live in the town. So,
I think Laura's got a terrific topic thing for the forum, and that is what's going to be required as an MBTA community. And I think it's really a way to communicate what the requirements are and then address how you're going to meet those requirements. So you can have an information packet online that people can have available even before the forum, and perhaps have a basis for discussion there. And I think that would be an easier one to really focus in on getting people's attention, particularly when they see that it's going to be by right multifamily.
David?
Great, thank you. Two quick things. When you talked about the process, I would just wait to see what comes out of what KP Law does, and then as we're going through the forums as to what ends up getting on there on the spring town meeting, because there most likely will be substantive changes. It's not just a matter of housekeeping articles. I think there will be substantive changes. It's just a matter of, are those the controversial ones or not, maybe. So depending upon what ends up on the cutting room floor, you might have everything there, you might not. And so I wouldn't, just hitch the wagon to say, let's do 2, let's do 1. I think let's go through the process and see what comes back and what needs to be done. If it looks like it's too much for that Springtown meeting, that's fine. I think to go from there. And secondarily, because with the MBTA communities, we might have to put things into the bylaw for that town meeting next spring to be compliant with the state on that. And that would certainly be a substantive change. So I think we need to just go through the process and then see what needs to go in there and what doesn't. And secondarily, quickly, when you're talking about doing polls or whatever, when you're asking people, you're only getting a one-dimensional look at it. So in other words, if we had a magic wand and say, we're going to stop all residential development in Cohasset tomorrow, there might be people who would say that's great. But then when you say to them, well, if you do that, your taxes are going to go up faster than they would be otherwise, because there's going to be no new growth and development in the town to offset some of the Prop 2.5. Well, when they know that, they might have a different answer. That's not going to be encapsulated in a one button A, B, C, D poll that you're going to send out to people. So there's policy ramifications when you ask people to say, are you for or against something? Do you like this or not? Well, there's also the other end of what is the ramification to them on that. If they don't want more commercial development, then again, the residential taxes are going to go up to have to fill the gap for that, and vice versa. So I think, you know, again, the polls are important to get to people and to get an idea of where people are on some of the subjects, but they're only one dimensional in a way, because those policy beliefs have ramifications that they might not know about.
Good point. Yeah.
Yeah, a long time ago at a Mass Municipal Association meeting, which is the statewide, I don't know what it's called now, it's the statewide trade group for the select boards. We got a lot of interesting data on residential taxes versus commercial taxes, and what residential taxes bring in terms of its ability to pay for services. And, you know, I hope when we get to that forum on housing, because that's where that kind of discussion is going to come, I would like to bring in Chris. I'd like to bring in the superintendent of schools. You know, increased housing is going to potentially bring an increased school population, and that has impacts on our schools. You know, I remember that Avalon was projected it would generate 76 new kids a year, and it never did. It has never hit that number or even come close to that number. But if we have more multifamily development, that is a possible ramification. So it's not just zoning that we want to present to people, Dave, but you're right. We have to present to them all these other ramifications about fiscal policy and taxes that zoning may impact, depending on what it is we do. I mean, we have this thing that we want to do more multifamily housing. Is that sentiment in town? Is the sentiment that we should stop growing altogether? We're pulled in two different directions in this town all the time, and that's not probably uncommon anywhere else, but we should explain all the ramifications all the way down the line, not just zoning. So, all right, so looking at the agenda, all of this discussion has pretty much gotten us through points 3 through 6. But again, let me just put out one last time to have a consensus. Do we bring anything forward in fall town meeting this year? And again, my only suggestions are height, the definition of height, and the potential for, and if anybody wants to see what it looks like, let me share the screen. That's what it looks like. That's what we'd come up with a long time ago, and that's what we were supposedly implementing as a matter of policy, is not definition. Do we come forward with that? Do we discuss a buffer zoning in the village and harbor? I'm going to leave that, because our articles can be written fairly quickly for that, and we can discuss them at our next meetings and would have to get them ready. But do we want to do it at all? Or do we want to just go on the track to first present something in spring of 23? So let me just, you know, and again, it's not limited to those two issues, but is there any other issue that people think is such immediate need that it requires attention at this upcoming town meeting?
And Tom, just remind me, if we get rejected on this, how long do you have to wait? Is it 2 years?
2 years.
Not unless, if the planning board recommends for it, you don't have to wait.
All right.
Does the planning board have anything that it's going to be proposing?
Not that I'm aware of, Lauren, right? We don't have anything.
Usually our work product gets recommended to the planning board.
Yeah, it has to go through a formal process of recommendation to the planning board, but and for that to take place for the December town meeting, that would have to be before then, sometime in October.
Right. None of the other planning board members have approached me about any rogue zoning articles they have for this upcoming.
So I'm you know, our committee was silent at the last town meeting. This would be 2 town meetings in a row. We're silent, not saying that's good nor bad. But, people realized that at the December 21 town meeting, we had to withdraw things. There was the idea that we would come back with something. I don't think we need to come back with that particular article, but again, I just throw out the idea of whether we should come forward with anything of immediate concern. So.
And Tom, I think Clark had asked the question, but just understanding like the intent of this change, is it to clarify like a lack of clarification in the definition?
It's to get it's to clarify some things, particularly with the measurement of a slope roof, which is one issue, but the means of measurement at the ground level, these 12 points around the perimeter, it's to get a better accurate mean measurement, of what the starting point is, and that's the whole point of it. Right now, we get people and they're picking, 2 spots. Sometimes we get 4. And as Clark pointed out, there was a project a year ago that became a poster child for a lot of things. It ended up being an after the fact permit. It illustrated problems in how we can fine and the powers we have and don't have to do that. And it illustrated problems with height. It illustrated a lot of problems, but height was a particular one that it did. So again, I just like the work needs to be started now to have any articles ready for the December town meeting. So I simply want to put it to a vote tonight. Do we want to or not? The height is written. Any other topic we'd have to, it depends on what the topic is and how quickly we could write it. David.
I don't think bringing anything into the special town meeting is going to be ready for prime time. You've got the forums, you've got what's going to come back from KP Law. I, like you, like to get things done yesterday. There was tons of things in the zoning bylaw that I would love to change at this special town meeting, but I just don't know if the time's going to allow for it to get it where it's going to get vetted properly and be able to get in front of people. And with the other changes that are going to come in the spring, knowing that there's going to be a whole host of housekeeping plus some substantive ones, I wouldn't want to get off on the wrong foot and put something out in the special and have it go down in flames. And then, where does that put the important ones that you're going to be bringing up in the spring? I think the history of the last year, and again, it doesn't make me gun shy at all, but from what I saw in the special town meeting last year and what was supposedly going to look like it was just going to sail through, it got absolutely upended by a line of speakers who were prepared to speak on the topic, and it went point by point by point in every different direction against the bylaw. And so even a minimal change like this, which would kind of just clean up the language, I think we need to be prepared. We've been put on notice from last year. I think we need to be prepared and even more so going forward.
If we stuck to the proposal before of the 2-step process, the definitions would all be coming in the spring. So, and this would be included amongst all the definitions. Well, I don't have a problem. It's just that I will tell you that the planning board is having increasing numbers of issues with this, and they'll go forward for a few more months. So that's
Tom.
the way it is. So, all right. Is that it? Well, Jack, before I get it, anybody else got like a consensus?
No, I was just going to say that I do agree with David to a certain extent, but I also think that something like this, if it's just clarifying like the number of points, I would say that if you were lowering the height to 30 feet, I'd say that would cause a fire. But if we're just basically clarifying that you need to take a certain amount of points so that it's fair what you're taking, I don't see that being as big of a deal as opposed to if we were just decreasing the maximum height limit. But that's just an opinion I have.
Take that as one in one direction and one in another. Jack?
Yeah, I think Cassie makes a good point. This is not a major deal. However, I think what we learned for the last thing is that unless we're prepared with a full in-depth ability to discuss a whole variety of things and deal with a determined, organized opposition, we should not bring anything forward, because we will have people who will oppose it just to say that they can oppose it. So unless we're willing to really do that, I think we should not do that. I think David's just very correct. If we're ready to go for a full war, and I hate to use the term war, but a full discussion, then we should put it off and do it when we're ready. Otherwise, it'll be confusing. People won't understand it. We'll have the same thing that we saw before. So I would say, even though I would like to get it done, and this is an easy thing to do if you're dealing with rational opposition. However, in this case, let's wait until we're really ready. It's my opinion.
My only thought about overly obsessing with December 21 is that the context of that particular definitional change was, in my view, very consciously conflated with a regulation we were considering at the same time. And it's completely different than the context of this height definition. This is something that the planning board has discussed. Again, we supposedly implemented it with John Hallen as a matter of policy. But,
Well, I'm just gonna jump in because I don't think I've said anything about the height example. And I said something earlier in the meeting about having examples of problems where the current bylaw was used and to model what these changes would be for people with normal houses. I think that kind of analysis and information would be critical before recommending that it go forward. And we're at the point where if you really want to get something in for fall town meeting, where it's August, so
I know, and
I
it's written-
don't think we're ready. I mean, if we had 10 examples and we use your model bylaw on 10 different examples of structures that we see in the village, at the harbor, and on 3A and in the neighborhoods, then I'd say, well, that's the analysis and that points us in some direction. But we're not, just the words don't do the job, Tom.
Well, I'm disagreeing that every bylaw change has to be solving a problem. Sometimes it's just, this is a desirable provision for the
Well,
town.
I'm not saying every bylaw has to be solving a problem, but
Well, that's what
I'd like
you're
to
asking.
see what the problems are that people have identified with the current bylaw
I
that
think-
seem to be not right, or just like that shouldn't have happened, whatever it is.
It's not a question of what shouldn't have happened. It's happening because our bylaw lets it happen. It's the substantive.
I know that. I'm just saying, what were the problems with that?
The substantive change,
Using the current bylaw language for height.
the sole substantive change, the sole substantive change in this definition is to change how the height is calculated on a sloped roof. And it's a very simple thing to say to people. Do you want a 40-foot roof or do you want a 35-foot roof? And
Well,
that's
what's interesting about that, I get you go to the ridge line instead of the midpoint of the rafter. But then this doesn't even identify what the actual height is by current zoning. And I think that would be an important component of selling a change, because that height number, that could always go to 30 feet or 40 feet or 45. It could be whatever. It could be whatever it needs to be, but it needs to be a part of the information package that you're selling.
Of course it would be. There would be a comparison to the existing bylaw. But the change in explaining it to human beings is fairly simple. Do you want the possibility or the continued reality of 40-foot high roofs when our limit says 35? And do you think measuring it to the center line of a slope roof has any logical defense or explanation? That's it. That's the issue.
Well, I don't want to argue with you, Tom.
I think we should be aware that we're not arguing the merits of this height
Yes.
change. I think we all agree that it is needed and it's appropriate. This is just really a tactical thing as to when we bring it forward.
All right.
Tactically, and I don't think anybody who's looked at this, disagrees that this is what we want to do. And I think in terms of the overall thing, this will be folded into the rest of what's done and will be relatively uncontroversial.
All right.
But this is just a tactical thing to move this whole process forward.
All right, that's fine. But I'll ask the question then one more time. Any other issue other than this definition of height that people think is so pressing that it should be brought forward in the fall? Yes or no?
The only thing would be some kind of a moratorium or limited building permits.
We discussed a moratorium for the fall town meeting last year.
This group has not discussed it.
No, I know that.
I was gonna actually ask Judge Cutler her opinion on that, just with all of her experience.
I'm not saying I'm for it. I'm just, I think.
No,
what do you think?
If you were in a planning process and you were trying to develop brand new zoning requirements that had not been tried before, and you wanted to, and you had a discrete issue that you were addressing because of these studies and the ongoing proposals that could justify a short-term moratorium while you got the bylaws in place. But if it's just generally, we don't know what we're going to be doing, we just don't want anybody to do anything while we're thinking about it, I don't think it would be sustained.
And then that's somewhat of the consensus that the working group came to last fall about this, because it was much more generalized in nature, what we were discussing.
I think we had a top of mind.
Let me just throw out an example, Judge Cutler, is if we were to make a switch from our current house size, which is two-dimensional, the size of the lot, setbacks. And if we went to FAR, not knowing, of course, what the FAR number will be at, but if we were to make a switch to FAR or thinking about a switch to FAR, would that justify a moratorium?
Well, you'd have to show what it is you were doing in the interim. Not just we're thinking of changing it. We don't want anything to happen until we come to the next town meeting with a change.
Okay.
I think you'd really have to have, you're usually undergoing a series of studies, informational gathering, that sort of thing. And it's got to be pretty, it's got to be a pretty.
No, I appreciate that, because, it has been bandied about. We discussed a targeted moratorium in the harbor once, but, at this point.
But particularly with single family houses, putting a limit on the size is difficult anyway. You're skating a thin line, how to do it. So.
I'm aware of that. So, okay. All right. Well, then I take it we will not bring anything forward for fall town meeting.
There may be something in the diagnostic report that you'll know about by the, before the end of September. If it's something that I think, oh my gosh, you gotta deal with this right now.
That's fair.
We would have to, well, all right. So, just in case, Lauren, I would suggest if the warrant comes out, article submission comes out in September, we should maybe reserve a place. Let's reserve 2 places just in case, so that then we can slip something in if we have to in late September, early October. Then we can schedule the planning board hearing and the reviews by the select board and the advisory committee and all that. All right, that makes sense. All right. Looking at our agenda, hoping my notes will make sense when I turn them in the minutes. Anything else that anyone would like to discuss that hasn't been anticipated 48 hours in advance?
No, Lauren, did you say that there was a conflict of meeting twice a month?
2 forums a month in addition to 2 meetings was going to be problematic, but no longer an issue.
Need to do 2, and what I will try to do for everyone is, again, it's subject to the diagnostic coming in, but at least scope out some potential agendas so we know at each meeting what it is we're going to discuss, and try to keep it very targeted and focused. All right. So as far as the next meeting goes, what would be a Monday that's coming up, Lauren? When's Labor Day? September what?
Labor Day is September 5th.
All right. So September 12th.
Oh, I won't be here, Tom.
Oh, that's a day that you have reserved with the library,
Oh,
but you can always change that date.
no. When is the planning board meeting in September?
The 7th.
7th.
7th and 21st?
Yes, and we're holding the 14th for training.
All right. All right.
I think I could be the only one absent to still have a quorum.
Well, we're still doing Zoom, you know, since David did it from Guernsey, nobody has an excuse not to.
Right.
So, well, all right, so the 7th, no, wait a minute, the 5th is, well, yeah, that thing on the 12th will have to get moved.
Okay.
Let us meet on the 12th and let's plan for the forum on the 19th at this point, possibly the 26th. Although the 26th, I know I'm going to be out of town and I suppose I could do it by Zoom, but I don't know. I could, but let's plan for the meeting of this committee on the 12th and a meeting for the first public forum on the 19th.
Tom,
Yeah,
I can't do the 19th, so I would suggest we do the first forum on the 26th.
I can't do the 26th unless I can do it by Zoom, completely by Zoom. I suppose I could, but I'm going to be, no, no, that isn't going to work. I know it's not going to work. So
Well, do we want to plan at least our next committee meeting on the 12th? And in the meantime, we can target
just
a forum date.
keep things off. Yeah, the forum is going to be a hybrid meeting. So, you know,
And then there's Columbus Day.
So you've got the 4th, is it the 4th? 3rd of October is Monday too, right?
all right. Let's do our meeting on the 12th. I'd like to pencil in the forum for the 19th and figure out a way to hold it on the 19th.
Okay. By the way, Tom, I do have to run, but I just want to briefly speak to the committee. I have asked Paul Grady to also join this committee. He was, as you all know, on planning, and he did, and he very enthusiastically. I have so many things going on that I can't be sure I'll be able to be here at every meeting, and I think it's important that the select board demonstrate, their strong support for what this bylaw committee is doing. So Paul Grady will be determining. Unfortunately, his daughter's just going off to college or some such thing, so he couldn't be here tonight, but he will be doing that, and I will continue to be active in the committee, but I think we wanted a little bit more. And Paul is also, as you know, Paul is very good at taking committee stuff and getting them approved and fighting for things he thinks is important. So I think he'll be a very, very helpful part of this group.
We also put out at the beginning of the meeting and hope, Lauren and Cassandra are going to put out some publicity and hope you'll say it at your next meeting. We need member number 7. So we, preferably a, citizen, non-board affiliated human being. So, all right.
And one final thing, I've also spoken to Woody Chittick and David McMorris, and they can't be full-time, but they will be reviewing our notes. They'll be occasionally viewing what we're doing and will lend their considerable expertise and experience to assist us kind of unofficially, but that's very good because they're very knowledgeable and they agree that this is important. So
before you got here, I mentioned I ran into Woody and he's going to share with us his edits to the accessory dwelling bylaw, and also had always planned for the zoning board to take first crack at the non-conforming article. and Judge Cutler, last fall, another idea that was floated for the fall town meeting was to repeal Cohasset's very unique version of the single lot exemption. And then it was brought to our attention that there's an SJC case that said even if we did that, we couldn't do it. All right. So in the non-conforming article that is in the new draft, would be the new Article 7 rather than Article 8. I've laid out four choices that I think come from that case decision and what we do with our unique single lot exemption. But with this committee's permission, I would like to have Woody and the ZBA, since they're the ones who deal with that article, take a first crack at it. Obviously, Judge Cutler and then Carol Murray will be looking at it too and focusing on the issues there. It's one that comes
Tom,
out.
I do apologize, but
All
I
right,
do
no,
have.
we're done. We're gonna do
Thank you
minutes.
all very much,
Thanks,
Judge
Jack.
Cutler. Thank you very much. You know, I think we're very fortunate to have that level of expertise, and not that we don't all have expertise, but Judge Cutler has special expertise.
No, we really needed someone like you on the team, Judge Cutler, so thank you.
Thank you. All right.
I think
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Good group.
All right, so I will solicit Woody's thoughts on the accessory dwelling and then his input on non-conforming article. All right, the only other administrative thing we have are the minutes from our last meeting on August 8th. Can I have a motion to approve them, or unless there's any comments about them?
So moved. Yeah.
Second,
Thank you, Clark. Roll call, Clark.
aye.
Tom Callahan, aye.
David Frog, aye.
Cassie,
Cassie Malatesta, aye.
absent. Anything else anybody wants to discuss? Thank you, Judge Cutler and Cassandra Lauren, for all being here, all of you for being here, and entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Enjoy the rest of the summer.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you so much.
You on the
Good night,
12th.
everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Good night.
Okay.